Hi everybody, welcome to episode 2 of the Beyond the Cloud series with myself, Natalie Gray, Head of Partnerships at Codurance, and our Head of Sales, Rob Gray. Hey Rob.
Hello.
Hello. Last episode we talked about kind of building the business case for a migration to the cloud and talked about some of the reasons that we're hearing customers are looking to do that move, some of the challenges that they're experiencing. So I think we've got a good handle on sort of the reasons why people want to move to the cloud. We thought this episode, it would be quite interesting to talk about sort of how you sort of start to make that a reality. Be really interesting to hear from your conversations with businesses in the UK, Rob, how they're approaching this, especially kind of in slightly kind of economic uncertain times. How do these businesses really kind of move forward with their sort of technology strategy? We often hear that migrating to the cloud is, seen as some kind of big, scary thing that's, going to cost a lot of money. Where do we start? There's a lot of risk involved. We don't necessarily have the skills. Do we understand the security implications? There's many kind of scary reasons. And it's almost sometimes feels like it can become quite paralyzing to actually make that move to go to the cloud. So it takes sometimes many months or longer even to kind of get to that point where you feel you're ready to dive in and get the migration moving. So yeah, just be interested to hear how Codurance approaches these challenges for customers and how we can, make it a bit less scary and start to see some of the value that the cloud can bring them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. It's quite a big, I think it's an important topic to touch on because regardless of the size of the organization or the size of the perceived migration, whether you're doing a large big bang migration of your entire infrastructure or whether you're doing it iteratively over a period of time, which is something again that we can speak about. I think the perceived risks of the things that you mentioned that I wrote down, you've got the money, you've got risks, securities, you've got people. There's some of the things that will slow down creating a business case or slow down a migration is the uncertainty that falls around those things. So I think it's important to always address them early on because obviously, like many things, the sooner we can address some of those uncertainties, the earlier we're able to kind of start moving things forwards. And in this case, the earlier an organization is able to start benefiting from being in the cloud and some of the services that are available to them. I think just to kind of go down the list that we have, I think from a money or from a cost perspective, I think what we see a lot when we're working with organizations is they always ask, what is my monthly reoccurring revenue or annual reoccurring revenue going to be when I'm in the cloud? How is it going to be cheaper for me? What am I going to be spending once I'm in the cloud? Because that's what a lot of organizations base a lot of their migration strategies on. We're going to move into the cloud because it'll be cheaper. There's a lot of other benefits as well that we can speak about, whether it's the ability to monitor your workloads, whether it's the observability that you then get, the ability to scale much faster or to adopt modern technologies once you're in the cloud. But cost is a big one for a lot of organizations, especially right now, given kind of where we are within the economy. So I think cost is a big one. And I know, one thing that we do at Codurance very early on when we work with a lot of organizations in this kind of business case stage is kind of doing a lot of cost analysis with them. So we really try and understand where they are right now in terms of the, whether they're on premise or within private cloud, what their usage looks like. I think if people are on premise with data centers, whether that's housed externally or whether that's in their own offices, it's trying to understand what their capex is when they're spending on hardware, and that has to be renewed every 3 to 4 years with servers. What that looks like, the cost of people actually maintaining and running those servers as well versus, and that's also a capped storage ability then as well. If you've got a physical server, there's only so much storage that it can hold. And if you have, if we work with a lot of e-com organizations that have a lot of spikes during certain periods, whether it's Black Friday or Christmas, for example, they need the bandwidth for those specific periods. So you might end up having a high cost for the whole year, but only really utilizing it on a very small part of the year.
Yeah.
So things like the cloud with elastic scaling, for example, or serverless, where you're able to scale up kind of at a small instance to enable the organization to to cope with those influxes in traffic is really kind of where we want to start moving the conversation and almost putting the flag in terms of cost. It's very hard to have a conversation with someone around cost when it's a fixed mindset of this is what I spend right now, and if we do a lift and shift, what will the cost look like? Because quite often there's not too much that differentiates the cost. If you do a very standard lift and shift, it will be slightly less. I don't think you'd ever have a case where you lift and shift an infrastructure in from on-premise servers into the cloud and spend more. But where people really start seeing value is when you start actually codifying or codifying your infrastructure and adopting some of the digital native services to really kind of drive that cost down while still seeing the the benefits and the usability of your applications. So that's quite a big one. I think understanding what the ongoing costs are in the cloud. Obviously with these digital native services, a lot of it is on a subscription basis. So the more you're going to adopt, the more it's going to add up, of course. But then you've got the usage of them, which is going to help support the growth of the business. So I think that's doing that kind of cost analysis very early on to give you an understanding of if you were to move into the cloud, this is what your predicted cost is going to be. If you were to adopt some of these services as well, this is, your cost is going to be here, but these are the benefits that you're going to start seeing from the business. And you'll start seeing benefits typically within year one, but it's that long-term kind of 2, 3, 5 year case that you really start to see benefits of being in the cloud. I know we talk a lot about the kind of migration cost or the cost bubble of a migration. I think a lot of organizations can see how a migration in itself could be quite expensive, especially if you're using internal resource or you have to recruit people to come in and do this. And we can touch on this when we talk about the people aspect of it. And again, that's the benefit of using a partner. I know with Codurance, we're a part of a number of different competencies with our cloud partners where we're able to draw down funding to support or offset a lot of the costs of a cloud migration, which only adds obviously benefits to working with a partner like Codurance. But you tend to see that there's that kind of migration curve that once you're doing a migration, you can see costs are starting to go up because you're still paying for your, again, let's use the assumption, you're still paying for your on-premise servers or your data center. Those costs are still there because you've still got applications housed there. You're then starting to pay for the services which are being used in the cloud. So you've almost got two costs being put up for the same thing in some instances. And then you've also got the cost of a partner that's doing it, whether or not a lot of that cost is being offset by a different competency that the partner might have, or whether or not there's funding elsewhere that's being utilized. So you start to see costs going up, but then what you don't tend to see or talk about is how that curve then starts to dip down lower than where it previously was. And that's typically because a migration has been done. And again, we can talk more around that kind of big bang migration where it's high risk, high reward, or that iterative, let's take a small workload or a small piece of an application, move it into the cloud, get it right, understand the process, how it works, start seeing benefits, and then start iteratively making that migration across. And then you start to see how it continues to dip down in terms of your monthly or annual expenditure in the cloud, because you've kind of had that rise of doing a job or investing in the project, and then when you're in the cloud and you're adopting the services and you're starting to see some of the benefits, you start to see that the costs are a lot lower as well. So I think that's there are a lot of the reasons that we start to see early on why an organization is stalling in moving forward with a migration plan is really just the misunderstanding of that short-term investment into a migration isn't what your long-term costs are going to be. It's that initial spike in let's get things moving and let's start moving things into the cloud for an understanding of what the benefits are going to be. And really helping an organization understand with some cost analysis that if you were to keep your existing infrastructure as it is, this is what you spend, and you know what you spend already because obviously it's where you are. But if you were to mirror that across to a public cloud provider, this is what your estimated cost would be. So you can very visibly see the benefits of if everything stayed exactly the same, this is what your costs will be. But then the idea is you can obviously start adopting some of the digital native services that are a part of that cloud services provider, which will start reducing some of that cost. And it really depends on the volume of compute that's being used by a partner. But the idea is by working with them and by modernizing continuously, and again, as we said, kind of codifying that infrastructure, you start to see that your expenditure on infrastructure being in the cloud does start reducing.
Definitely. And it's, I guess, with the cost as well, we're looking at not only kind of comparing being on-prem to being in the cloud, but there's also other costs like maintaining the skills of being on-prem. You know, those kinds of legacy skills are harder to find. You know, the cost is therefore going to go up. There's kind of all of the sort of the sustainability element of it. So kind of running your own infrastructure is also very expensive. You know, energy prices are going through the roof at the moment. So yeah, I guess in terms of sort of ROI, there's just a lot of other factors that perhaps people don't necessarily immediately think of when comparing. Are you really comparing kind of apples with apples, as it were? So there's a lot of great tools from the cloud providers as well around sort of cloud financial management. And it really does help, as you say, to kind of build that business case from that kind of cost perspective, that sort of CapEx versus OpEx comparison, right?
100%. And you know, one of the main reasons that there's different reasons as to why organizations would want to adopt the cloud. Again, a lot of it is listed in a lot of different areas, and we talk about it a lot with our customers, whether it's more around the observability side of things, whether it's the ability to scale a lot quicker being in the cloud and adopting these services. But cost is a big thing. You know, organizations are, you know, in most cases that we work with, commercial organizations, they're profit or loss, and they have that kind of that net revenue that they want to make as large as they possibly can with what they've got. So being able to operate in an efficient way, if not better, but pay obviously a lesser margin for it, that's always going to be attractive for organizations. So trying to kind of understand the true ROI versus, like you said, that kind of investment into people, the sustainability side of things, the long-term and short-term costs and benefits. I think trying to really group all of that together to create that overarching picture of, you know, this is really what a migration is. It's not just a lift and shift from one place to another. It's the whole kind of, you know, it's the whole package that comes along with it.
Yeah, I guess it's really having that sort of taking a step back and almost kind of shifting left with that conversation and really understanding, you know, kind of getting under the skin of why these businesses are actually, you know, looking to move to the cloud. And it's not usually just because it's kind of cooler technology and they've heard everybody else is going into the cloud. It's usually much more related to business reasons. So as you say, kind of if you're just going to do a typical, you know, from one place and lift and shift into the cloud, you're just bringing the same challenges over into a different environment, right? So innovation and kind of, you know, modernizing your applications and your platforms, but really kind of understanding where that is, why you're doing that from a business perspective. Why do you want to make this investment? And where, you know, it's that kind of modernization conversation or driving innovation, I guess we hear a lot from customers.
Absolutely. And I think when we're talking a lot around, you know, kind of the replatforming applications, security is a big thing that we're hearing a lot with our partners at the minute, and those that are still looking at migrating that we're working with, security is a huge thing for them because it's very much reliant on the staff that they have. And I think that's an important thing to talk about is the people. So when you are looking at doing a migration, obviously the, you know, technology is never a problem. It works in its way. The people that are kind of, you know, let's say controlling it or implementing it, that can 9 times out of 10 be the reason something isn't working or goes wrong. So, and again, it's one thing that we spend a lot of time working with people with is when we are putting together that migration strategy and we're working with them, doing a series of workshops to understand those things like the what is the business case, what is the objective for doing a migration, what are the benefits that you're looking to, you know, receive from being in the cloud, and what you're hoping to achieve as a business over the next 2, 3, 5 years by being in the cloud. The people is a big part of it because it's the people that are effectively going to do the migration. Again, whether it's that big bang or iterative one, and we tend to find that there's kind of two things that we tend to find. People end up putting together, collaboratively with Codurance, they put together a kind of a well-scripted or well-crafted migration plan, and we understand kind of where we're going to start from a small piece of the infrastructure. We're going to start moving that over. We're going to get that right, create that gold standard, let's say, and then go back and start kind of moving everything over iteratively, so you have less friction within the organization, and that as we said, that kind of spike in cost, as opposed to rapidly going high with a big bang migration. It's kind of spread out over a shorter period of time, and you slowly also then start seeing the benefits. We see two things with the people. You either have individuals within an organization that know that organization and that infrastructure like the back of their hand, which is brilliant, but they've never worked on cloud technologies because they're used to being where they are. So in terms of understanding how to adopt some of the digital native services or actually do a migration, they've never had the experience. But then vice versa, you tend to find that they either have people with the experience, but they don't have a clue where to start. So they might have, they might be junior or mid-level, for example, and their career has kind of, you could say they were born in the cloud in a sense. Their career was born working on AWS or working on Azure. So actually having to migrate something over from on-premise or more from legacy, they've never had to go through that journey. So we tend to find organizations kind of fit in a middle. And we've had a few conversations where people they've worked with a cloud provider, they've created that strategy, they've understood what they want to start adopting with a migration. But because they've never done it, there's a huge risk. And sometimes it's built up from their own perspective. It's, I don't want to do this because I've never done it. The risk of me messing this up could be, for a lot of organizations, huge.
Yeah, it's a career thing, isn't it? It's, if you're a CTO, this could be, the make or break from your, future career prospects. So you've got to get it right and make the right decisions. Definitely, yeah.
100%. So, we tend to find that we're brought in either very early on, which, as a consultancy is the beneficial part for us and we believe for the organization, because we're able to co-create that strategy and really identify where the benefits are going to be right from the beginning. And it makes creating that business case much quicker and much easier and much more in depth, because it's something that we've gone through a number of times and we're able to kind of help support them on that journey as well. Or we get brought into, an organization that's created that business case. They're kind of at the point where they want to move forwards, but they're not quite confident in taking that first step themselves. There's two things. They're either not quite confident in taking that first step, or they're not too sure where to start. What area of the architecture should they start with? What should move over? How should it move over? Do we just lift and shift and then modernize, or do we actually start modernizing as we move? Which, there's pros and cons for both. I think Codurance itself are much more of a let's modernize as we move to really benefit from the cloud and not open up the risk of, it's in the cloud and it works fine, let's leave it, but nothing's actually changed. So I think people is a really important thing to consider. And again, if you're going to be working with a partner on that, there's a lot of experience, Codurance, there's a lot of experience we can bring to actually support you through that migration and the modernization side of it as well. Or are you going to have to go out and recruit these people? Because that in itself adds at least 3 months onto a migration plan, because the time it takes to recruit and then wait for people's notice periods and then for them to actually onboard and understand your infrastructure and organization to then go do a migration, that takes time as well. So all you're doing really is delaying the inevitable of you moving into the cloud and benefiting from being there as well.
Let's wrap up then. I guess on our next episode, we'll be talking about the modernization conversation. So, you've got into the cloud, you've made that business case, you've done the migration. How do you modernize? How are you going to really get the value out of your investment in the cloud? Just before we finish today, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. If you want to follow us, then do follow at Codurance on our social channels. If you've got anything that you'd like to discuss further, or you think there's certain topics that you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, then again, just comment below or reach out to us and we'd love to hear from you. So yes, see you next time.